The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, J.N. Jagannathan in conversation with the Museum of Toronto about its new exhibit on how black culture shaped Ontario's capital city. Up first, John Michael McGrath and yours truly with reaction to the Ontario election leaders debate. OnPoli is next. Dude, little sugar off the top, as always. Some traditions are very hard to break. We don't want to break them. Little T-shirt explanation off the top.
Yeah.
This is the big interchange as you're going up Highway 400, and you get to a point where you're either going to go off to Sudbury, take Highway 69, or you're going to go up Highway 11 to North Bay, which is where last Friday the Northern Ontario Leaders Debate took place. So this is my way of doing a lovely segue into what did you think of the Northern Ontario debate last Friday?
Well, so I think it's worth mentioning that the Northern Issues debate is hosted by FONOM, which is the Federation of Northern Ontario Municipalities, and so there's a much more municipal focus on the topics they debate. And nothing wrong with that at all. As a municipal policy guy, I appreciate I appreciate it, and I think you definitely saw some of those questions that were asked during the debate were very clearly tailored for what mayors wanted to hear, what mayors and councillors wanted to hear. And one in particular stuck with me, which was at one point the moderator asked about would a government led by one of the four party leaders amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, which is not provincial legislation. No premier is going to be able to do that. That's not within their power. But it is one of the requests that mayors have signed on to. So that just gives you a bit of a flavor of the way who is behind the debate can influence which questions get asked. Otherwise, I enjoyed it. I don't think any real explosive knockout blows came from that Northern debate, but as we've said before on the pod, I think it's important to give Northern Ontario a venue where it gets to be the focus.
Were you alive in 1984?
I was 3 in 1984.
You were 3? Oh, so I'm guessing then you did not watch the U.S. presidential debate that year. If you were only 3.
No, I did not.
Because there was a line in the Northern Ontario debate that for me was very evocative of something. I was older than 3. Yes. Of something I saw in that debate, which was it was Ronald Reagan running for re-election, this time against Walter Mondale, who was Jimmy Carter's vice president. And whenever Mondale said something that was a complaint about the Reagan record that Reagan didn't like, Reagan would sort of accuse him of being a nattering nabob of negativism, to steal another line from another president. That would have been Nixon. Spiro Agnew, Nixon's vice president. Boy, I'm getting in the weeds here. And Reagan would always say, "There you go again."
Yes.
And that was a line that Bonnie Crombie pulled out to use against Doug Ford when Ford said things about Crombie's record that Crombie didn't like. So for a moment there, this is a very long way of my saying I felt transported back to 1984 whenever Bonnie Crombie pulled out the "there you go again" line.
Yes.
Anyway, was that a long way to go for a not very good story?
I mean, I appreciate the history lesson. We'll see if our audience does.
In the meantime, let's get on to last night's debate. Off to issue 1. Last night, the 4 major party leaders were on stage for the Ontario election leaders debate. Overall, JMM, how would you rate the quality of the debate we saw among Doug Ford, Marit Stiles, Bonnie Crombie, and Mike Schreiner?
I really liked this debate. You and I have watched a bunch of these now, and sometimes they're not always gold. Let me put it that way. I thought you mostly got a very good exchange. Inevitably, these things sometimes devolve into a lot of crosstalk, and you can't necessarily hear what people are saying. That happened in this case, but I don't think it spoiled the entire debate. I liked the more lighthearted questions that they tossed in to break up the I say this is somebody who loves policy debates, but break up the policy tedium.
Yeah.
You know,
what did they asked? Like, if you had a weekend off, what would you do? Or
yes.
if you had to cook a meal for somebody, what would you do?
Yes,
what
exactly. What was your first job?
Yeah.
I can't imagine there are that many voters who are going to be making their decision next week about who to vote for based on those questions, but It is nice to remember that there are people behind these faces and behind these parties.
Politicians, they're just like us.
Well, not entirely just like us, but close to it, yes. Yeah. Just about those little lighthearted moments. People were asked what was your first job, and Doug Ford mentioned that his very first job was delivering the Globe and Mail newspaper, but I think he referred to his real first job was working at a meat packing plant. This is something that has come up before in his biography. It's one of those details that I think, unless you've been paying a ton of attention to provincial politics, it may have eluded your notice. But what he didn't mention, and I think is actually like a really interesting point about his biography, is that because of that time he spent working at a meatpacking plant, he has not eaten red meat in 40 years. That is just a result of that experience.
Yeah, an interesting little biographical detail. It's also, when he said that, I thought about the fact that he has made a lot of changes as it relates to alcohol policy, yes. And he also doesn't drink.
Yes.
Yeah, never drinks alcohol.
Yeah, and like, what is Ford Fest? Sometimes, often, many times a year, except a big barbecue. And I suspect that Doug is not eating the hamburgers at Ford Fest,
Right. Now, I'm trying to remember now. I think Bonnie Crombie said her first job was as a 14-year-old cash register checkout clerk at Woolco.
Yes.
And she mentioned she had to lie about her age to get that job.
Yes.
I think Marit Stiles said she was a swim instructor.
Yep.
What did Mike Schreiner say he was?
Mike Schreiner grew up on a farm.
So, yes, he grew up on the farm and was running a combine at an age when he probably shouldn't have been.
Yes.
But yeah, that was interesting stuff.
A lot of people violating child labor laws on that debate stage.
Well, we are going to go through some of the more noteworthy moments from last night's debate, and we want to start with this rather sharp attack by the Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, on the PC leader, Doug Ford. Let's roll that.
Doug, I have one question for you, and one question only. After 7 years of lies, why should anyone trust a word you say?
Okay, that one was pointed for sure, and I know that last night when you and I were sort of going over the script, we emailed each other and said that was a zinger, and there was more that ensued from that. Yes. What did you see in that exchange?
Well, that exchange and others that happened through the debate, we know that Bonnie Crombie's, one of her biggest liabilities right now in this election is that she is still a relatively recently picked leader of the Liberal Party. Many voters just do not know who she is. She's obviously a big name in Mississauga politics, Peel region more broadly. But beyond that, she has this, the problem that a lot of opposition leaders always end up having, which is that they're just simply not as well known as the Premier. So when you're on a stage like this, when you're on the debate stage, you've got a bunch of different jobs, but one of them is simply to try and be memorable, right? You want the voters to be able to pick you out of a lineup 24 hours later, right? You don't want to spend 90 minutes on TV and not have anybody remember what you said. So I think she distinguished herself in that sense. You've got to not just distinguish yourself from the four leaders, but Bonnie Crombie in this particular context has to distinguish herself as an opposition leader, because there are three people lobbing bombs at Doug Ford. And if you're just watching at home, you may not necessarily be able to determine which one of these leaders is the one who really deserves your vote at the end of it. And on top of that, because this is like you're constantly balancing these things, you have to be memorable. You have to be, emphatic in your attacks on the government, but you also have to not turn off too many other people. And if I can be blunt, I think this is also particularly a challenge for female party leaders who often a woman leader's antagonism with attacks on the government, which is the role of an opposition leader, can get read wrong. And so lots of different things to be balancing. And
you got to look strong but likable at the same time. It's a tough balancing act.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, this moment and other moments through the debate really, I think, show us where Team Crombie, if I could put it that way, has decided to put their efforts and their energy, and they are trying to really make her stand out. And I think at least in those moments, they did succeed.
The preamble to that question was, Doug, you want to build this fantasy tunnel under the 401. You've racked up more debt than any premier in Ontario history. Why should we believe a single thing you say? That was the preamble to it, and it was a dramatic moment. She had another strong moment against Doug Ford near the very end of the debate, so let's play that one too, if you would.
You were raised privileged with a silver spoon in your mouth. You didn't have to work for anything. You got a company handed to you, Doug, so you don't understand how expensive things are today. I bet you couldn't tell me what the cost of eggs are.
I was waiting for the Premier to shout across at her, actually, they are... but he didn't, so maybe he doesn't know.
Anyway. That is one of those gotcha questions that you would think maybe he was briefed on, right? Like price of eggs, price of milk. These are things that people routinely try to get the government leaders on. That was a more personal attack than we've seen on Ford elsewhere in this campaign. Frankly, I don't think we saw anything like that at all in the 2022 campaign. So I've got a bunch of different theories on this. Some of them are only half-baked. We'll see how well they stand up to the test of time. But I think there are a lot of progressive voters who want to see a bit more of that sharp personal attack against Doug Ford, particularly if you've been paying attention to Doug Ford's career since 2010 when he first was on Toronto City Council. I think for a lot of progressives, the populist politics of Doug Ford have always been seen as a bit of a falsehood, a charade, if I could put it that way, that this is, as Crombie says, this is a man who inherited a substantial company from his father, who was also an MPP, of course. Those voters who want to see those sharp elbows, they want to see the knife go in a little bit, they exist. And I think Crombie is basically just demonstrating, indeed, if you want to see somebody who is going to throw those elbows and really, take the fight to Doug in this way that you want to see it, I'm the person to do that. We'll get to this a bit later. I mean, she did explicitly invite New Democrats to come vote for Liberals this time around. I think this is related to that. She's not just saying like, hey, come vote for the NDP. She's saying like, hey, NDP voters, like I'm throwing the punches you want to see thrown. We will see how well that works for her, but it's definitely a sign of a kind of fight that we didn't see, as I say, in the last election.
I think one of the things we have to remember here as well, and we're about to play a clip of Marit Stiles, the NDP leader, this was the first leaders debate for both Crombie and Stiles.
Yes.
It's number 3 for Doug Ford. It's number, wait a second, 18, 22, and 25. So this is the third leaders debate for Doug Ford.
Yes.
How many is this for Mike Schreiner? It's got to be 3 for him as well.
2 or 3? Because I can't remember if he made it onto. Did he make it onto the stage in 2018?
He won that year, so he won a seat that year.
But they didn't have a seat.
They didn't have a seat yet. Oh my gosh!
Somebody
Somebody will let us know. I forget right now. But anyway, he's been here before. Is my point. This is a nerve-wracking experience, and I can remember I had the honor of moderating the 2011 leaders debate. And it was the 4th one for Dalton McGuinty at that point, his 4th one as leader. And I sort of just in jest afterwards said to him, so I guess it's a lot less nerve-wracking now that you've done this so many times. And he looked at me like I was a complete fool. He said, what, are you kidding? No, no. These are still extremely nerve-wracking experiences where the course of an entire election campaign can be changed. Just ask John Turner in 1984 in 30 seconds. So you got to have your game on.
Yeah, we talked about the phone-on debate. This is not quite the only high stakes event of the campaign, but it is certainly the highest, most prominent, highest stakes event. If anything is going to really change up the trajectory of the polls, it would be something like the debate, and that could only be nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing.
Sure. Okay, as promised, here's Marit Stiles going after Doug Ford on the waterfront spa. Let's roll it.
You're talking about your little things, but listen, $2.2 billion that you're spending right now to subsidize a luxury spa in downtown Toronto, that's $400 per household in Ontario. Do you think you could maybe cancel that so that people in Ontario won't be subsidizing a luxury spa?
What'd you think of that exchange?
I think we have a very real problem when we discuss politics and policy in 2025. I think we've become inured to big numbers, right? The old joke, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money, right? And so I like this line from the NDP about breaking it down to the per household cost of the Thermos Spa at Ontario Place. $400 per person is in that, or sorry, per household, I should say, is a bit more of a relatable number. It's not entirely rational, but I think for a lot of people, if you say Ontario is spending $2.2 billion to subsidize this luxury spa, it's background noise, right? On the other hand, if you say that families in North Bay, in Windsor, in Arnprior are spending $400 to build a spa that they may never use.
That
right?
you can relate to.
Unless you visit Toronto.
Yeah.
You may never see this, much less never use. And so the NDP had actually started rolling that attack out a few days before. I definitely saw it on social media, and clearly they thought it was working for them, because that's how you end up with Marit Stiles using a line like that in the debate. And as I say, I think it gives people a bit more to bite into than just $2.2 billion.
Yeah, that was certainly one of her better attack lines against Doug Ford. One of her also better attack lines was against Bonnie Crombie, because, of course, they are fighting for the progressive vote amongst the two of them. This was on the issue of the Liberals accepting a $25,000 campaign contribution from private sector healthcare companies. And Stiles was sort of asking, how exactly are you going to be the guarantors of Medicare when you're taking money from private companies? How do you think that exchange went?
I mean, as you say, this was one of the instances where it was clear that Stiles and Crombie see their job as much as beating each other as beating Doug Ford. And, Crombie tried to laugh it off. I think she said, the NDP are jealous of her fundraising prowess, and then accused the NDP of believing that money grows on trees. I guess the implication being you got to raise the money from somewhere, right? The notable thing about that exchange, though, apparently, Colin DeMello of Global News tweeted out that in the room, the thing that was not caught on camera but happened was that it was one of the only times that Bonnie Crombie said something that got a genuine laugh out of Doug Ford. So, if I were Doug Ford, I could imagine lying back in the cut and enjoying that exchange.
Well, while we're talking about the Premier, there was an exchange about the Greenbelt. All four candidates were asked if it was your decision to make, would you allow any development in the Greenbelt? They all said no, but Doug Ford's answer was a little more memorable. Let's roll that.
Doug Ford, I'll turn to you. Would your government build housing on the Greenbelt?
No, and I think it was pretty clear. I said I was, and then I wasn't, and I went ahead and did it. But in saying that,
let's give him an opportunity to respond.
Something, I apologize to the people. Unlike any of you, when you do something, you don't want to apologize. I apologize to the people. We're moving forward. We're building homes.
Yeah, what he said before that, just before that clip, was, I was in favor of it, then I was against it, then I was in favor of it, then I was against it. So...
a certain self-awareness there about,
yes, indeed.
He got into this mess of his own making.
Yeah, but then he did go on to point out that he did apologize. He is one of, I think you have to hand it to him, he's one of the few political leaders who can apologize for doing something that clearly the majority of the electorate did not approve of, and he didn't suffer any political consequences for it. Now,
this is actually one of my, bugbears or whatever the phrase is. I'm actually driven to distraction by how easy it is so often for leaders to apologize, and they don't do it. And I know that they believe it signals weakness or whatever, but Kathleen Wynne, when she first won the Liberal leadership, became Premier, started off her time in government by apologizing for many of the mistakes. Now, admittedly, they were somebody else's mistakes, and that makes it
She was sitting
easier.
in that chair right over there in this studio, apologized 11 times for the gas plant decision. That was not even her decision to make.
Yeah.
But she apologized for it, and it
And then
helped.
she goes on to win a majority government, right? And then, you fast forward that clock another 4 years after the 2014 election, and she's running for re-election, and her ad was sorry, not sorry, right? And that did not work for her, to put it bluntly. The 2018 election was not good. And sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think people make a mistake if they don't understand actually how many voters do value that, Doug Ford goofs up and then he admits it, apologizes, and reverses course. And they're people could take a lesson from that.
One of the things I found odd about the exchange, and again, all four leaders said no building in the Greenbelt, no development in the Greenbelt. None of the three opposition leaders, unless I missed it, tell me if I missed it, none of the three of them said, Doug, incidentally, your government's under RCMP investigation for alleged malfeasance on this Greenbelt thing. So this is not really an, aw shucks, I kind of blew it and I apologize and we're all good now. This is, you're under investigation. Did anybody say that and did I miss it?
Not in the debate itself, in the scrums,
after, yes.
Marit Stiles did mention it, but yeah. I imagine there are a few people kicking themselves this morning, wishing that they could have a do-over there, because that's as close to the best opportunity they got to mention, yes, the ongoing criminal investigation of this government. Yeah, as I say, Stiles did manage to get to it in the scrums afterwards, but yeah, you missed your 90 minutes there.
Miss is the exact word. I'd say that's a huge miss for all three opposition leaders in an attempt to really lay a glove on Doug Ford, which certainly on the Greenbelt exchange they did not happen.
Yeah.
Okay, let's put the spotlight now on Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party, and he talked about the fact that Doug Ford is sending out $200 checks to all taxpayers just before the election campaign. Did you get yours, incidentally?
I did, yes.
You got yours?
Yes.
Do you know, one of the guys here who works audio, Brent, mentioned, this is really crazy, eh? He got the $200 check. He put it in his bank. For whatever reason, the bank did not recognize who the check was from, and they froze his account. And he could not have access to any of his money, not just the $200, but any of his money. And that's not the only story I've heard about how those checks somehow went kaflooey when people got them.
Yeah, I heard a bunch of stories about checks bouncing, like the government of Ontario check bounced. Not all of the line from the Ministry of Finance is that there's nothing screwy about the checks on their ends, that the banks were not prepared for this, which may be fine, whatever, but not a great... Not what you want to see in election season.
If I were a cynical person, I'd say, you know, if you want to buy votes, the least you can do is make sure the check's clear. But, okay, but I'm not going to say that. Don't worry, I'm not going to say that. Anyway, okay, here's Mike Schreiner taking on Doug Ford on the $200. Roll it.
And it's not fair that Mr. Ford has handed out $200 checks to millionaires and billionaires like Galen Weston, the guy gouging you at the grocery store, when so many people can't afford to even pay for groceries.
How do you think that landed?
It's a weird space we're in, where the Weston family name is kind of in the mud lately.
That's their go-to.
Yeah.
He is the go-to guy whenever they want to rail against somebody with money.
Yeah, but I have no... I'm not going to stand up to put my body between Galen Weston and his critics. But in the political context here, of course, Ford responded that, it's the people's money. He's just, giving it back to them. That was a plausible explanation back when the Harrison Eves government did this back, 25 odd years ago. In this case, I'm just reminding our listeners that Ontario is in a deficit. Any marginal increase in spending is debt that future generations will have to pay back.
You have to borrow that money.
That's not, you're not getting your money, you're getting...
Your children's money.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe your grandchildren's money. Yeah.
So aside from the fiscal civics lesson, this was, I think, one of Schreiner's sharpest lines all night. And as I say, the point about like the Weston family name not being like a hot commodity right now, I think Schreiner is able to talk to the public in a language that they understand. And so the dig at the Weston family, okay, or at Galen Weston particularly, that felt to me lifted very much out of, if not Twitter, then out of the discourse.
Gotcha. Okay, those are all the clips that we're going to play from the debate last night. Let's now do some overall analysis here, and I want to start with this. In your judgment, which leader looked truly in command of his or her brief?
I'm going to cheat a little bit and give 2, maybe 3 answers. Mike Schreiner just always gives the vibes of the kid who did the reading before class. And I say that with love, as
because you were that guy too.
I was, well, not always, but I was often that kid. He is, at least as of this recording, the only party leader who has the fully costed platform. He challenged the other leaders to make a fully costed platform available. We expect the NDP and the Liberals will. I'm not expecting the Tories will at this point. But very much a detail-focused, policy-fluent kind of guy. The other thing I would say, we've talked a bit about Crombie already, and I do think that you could see there was a plan that they walked, or that Crombie walked onto that stage with, obviously some of those lines were canned and rehearsed, as they must be. You don't just go
Not a lot
onto
of
the
spontaneity
debate
there.
stage, without a ton of preparation. But they had a plan, and you could see the elements of the plan, right? Making the sharp attacks, really trying to distinguish herself. And so when you can see the elements of the plan and you can see them executing a plan, and I think, and we'll see if the polling changes over the coming days and week. But I think the plan was conceived and it was executed reasonably well. So that's not so much a question of somebody in charge of like a policy brief, but somebody who was able to conceive of a plan and implement it.
Yeah, I thought she had 2 or 3 of the most dramatic moments in the course of the 90-minute debate. There was also a moment, though, early on in the debate where she was asked a question that was policy related, and she had to sneak down and look at her cheat cards a couple of times just to see that she was getting the details on that right. So that does look a little odd. In fairness, they all did that at the Northern Ontario Leaders Debate. They were all using cheat cards up there, including the Premier, reading answers, directly from whatever he had in front of him. I don't know if it was cheat notes or a computer screen or whatever.
No shade. We're reading some props off of our scripts too.
I know in past debates it was illegal. Illegal is too strong a word. It was against the rules to bring in notes with you. Doug Ford did it once anyway. But in the past, you're sort of not really supposed to bring notes in. I guess that doesn't exist anymore. They all brought notes in and from time to time availed themselves of that. Okay, next question is, you know how these things work. There's 3 opposition leaders and 1 premier. So it tends to be a 3-on-1 for much of the night. How well did Doug Ford hold up to those, very frequent 3-on-1 attacks?
I would imagine that the PC party has to be pretty happy with Ford's performance last night overall. As we mentioned, this is his 3rd debate now, and he's done a number of these. And then, even before he became premier, there was the PC party competition that he also had a debate, I believe, here. He got through 90 minutes on live TV, did not cause himself any obvious self-harm. He opened and closed his time on the stage talking about tariffs and the economy, repeatedly raised the issue of whether Ontario's economy was safe with any of the opposition leaders at the helm. He's talking about the stuff he wants to talk about, what he wants this election campaign to be about. The biggest risk for him would be that somebody who voted for him in 2018 and voted for him in 2022 would see his performance last night and be like, whoa, God, I can't vote for him again. And I don't think there was anything like that.
Right. And in fairness to Mr. Ford, he did a really good job of having a lot of facts at his fingertips. I don't recall him looking down at cheat notes when he was speaking right to the camera, saying things like, we've spent this much on this, we've spent that much on that. He had that stuff, in pretty good shape. Now, one of the more intriguing moments of the debate came in the closing statements, when Bonnie Crombie looked into the camera and made a direct appeal for the votes of the woman standing right beside her. She said, I want you NDPers to vote for me. How do you think that goes over?
This was interesting, right? Normally, the Liberals, this is not a novel dynamic, right? The Liberal Party is always happy to take NDP votes, but normally it's a bit more subtle. It's a bit more like, well, we're the strategic choice, or we're the only party that can defeat the government, or if they're in government, we're the only party that can keep the Tories out, right? So it is novel that we were sort of dropping any of the subtext here. There's a few problems for Crombie with this pitch, right? Back when she launched her run for the Liberal leadership, she was positioning herself as a person taking the Liberal Party to the right, explicitly saying that she believed the party had gone too far to the left under Kathleen Wynne. The party needed to be brought to the right. Can you start your provincial political career in that footing and then also try and poach NDP votes? Or poach is maybe not the best word, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
That's an interesting problem for her. The other issue is just where the polls are right now. If let's say that she succeeds and manages to get like half of the NDP vote to come over to the Liberal Party, that would be a really substantial success. It would say like, oh, well, it was worth asking. It was worth putting that line in the debate. It would not change the outcome of the election. Doug Ford would still be the premier afterwards. The Liberals would unquestionably be the official opposition. They would probably have a very substantial caucus in the legislature. But what Bonnie Crombie needs, and what any opposition leader needs, is not so much to boost their own standing at the expense of the other opposition parties. Where Doug Ford and the PCs are right now, they need to figure out some way to shave, 5 or 6 or 7, maybe more points off of where the Tories are, if you even want to be seriously in contention for government.
Well, that gets to my last question, which is there's always two ways of scoring these debates. One is on points, who got the most good lines out, who looked the most in control of their brief, etc. The other is, if you don't kill the king wins.
Yes.
So I think it sounds like what we're both saying here is that nobody killed the king. No. So on that template, Ford emerges unscathed and victorious. How about on points? Who helped themselves the most last night?
I got to say, I think Bonnie Crombie gave the sort of the anti-Ford voters, if I can talk about some 60% of the electorate, 55, 60% of the electorate that way. She gave that block of voters a lot to think about. As we say, strong attacks against Ford on policy and the trying to dent his populist image. You really are tying both the substantive and the symbolic attacks together. And, making that ask of NDP voters in particular, I'm not sure how well it worked, but on the other hand, a lot of the people who voted NDP in 2018 and in 2022 had voted Liberal in 2014, just one election before. So maybe Crombie manages to move some voters into her column. As I say, the problem with this strategy is, at least the way it looks right now, I don't think it puts her in contention to form government. But certainly if your primary aim in this campaign is to bring the Liberals back into official party status and even official opposition, I think maybe she's got a path there.
Voting day is the 27th of February, and as we say in Cook County, Chicago, vote early, vote often. Let's come right back with your column, my column, right after this. Okay, time now for our regular feature. You know it, you love it. It's called Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I reminisce about the columns that we wrote for our website, TVO.org, over the past week. What you got?
Last week I wrote 2 columns, and we highlighted one of them on our Friday episode. I'm going to go back to one of my earlier columns, which was about Donald Trump and the threat of tariffs. Doug Ford has already made one trip to D.C. We talked about that in the last episode. He has another one coming. And I think people need to be very clear-eyed about the risks and dangers that Canada faces right now. And so I don't love writing scary columns. I wrote a bunch of them during COVID, and I kind of hoped I was done with that. But there is this temptation to treat everything Donald Trump says as a bargaining ploy, that, he's not serious about annexation, he's not serious about tariffs. And every time people extend that charitable assumption, Donald Trump proves them wrong in action and word. I closed out that column by saying, Donald Trump is being very, very clear that he believes 2 things. A, Canada should not exist as a separate country from the United States, and so long as it does, any kind of prosperity we have, whether that is industrial jobs or anything else, our natural resources, any kind of prosperity we have is illegitimate, and he sees it as stolen from more deserving Americans. And I really, really hope that our policymakers, both at the provincial and federal level, can understand deep in their bones, and I'm speaking broadly here about people both in government and aspiring to be in government, that this is not normal politics that we are dealing with. This is something very different and very alarming.
I always want Canada to beat America on the ice. But this Thursday night, I've never wanted it more. Really. I mean, we need to spank them.
Yeah.
If only because they've got a president who wants to annex us.
Yes.
That's terrible.
It's, totally I mean, certainly unprecedented in your or my lifetime.
Yeah, quite true.
All right, and with that, let's go to the mailbag.
If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it to us at onpolitics@tvo.org. We're talking healthcare this week, eh?
We are indeed. We have an email from listener Don Houbraken. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Don, in Nepean, who asks, my concern is healthcare. I understand that Jane Philpott is working on primary care that will help a lot with other aspects of care. Will she be able to carry on her work regardless of what party is elected? Are all parties committed to what she is doing? I fear more studies or commissions or her work being interrupted because one party is cozying up with another idea. I fear reinventing the wheel, and I would feel better if she was encouraged to stay on task. How do I find out who to vote for on this important issue? Thank you, Don.
This is a very reasonable concern. I think the short answer, though, Don, on this one is yes. They pretty much are all on side with this, and I say that more by inference than by explicit statement made by any of the leaders of any of the four major parties, and that is, at the leaders' debate last night, there were several moments, I think, where the party leaders all said, yes, everyone in the province of Ontario will have a family doctor within 4 years. That is my plan. And there's 2.5 million people who don't have a family doctor now. And the idea is, with Jane Philpott appointed by the current government, to look into a way in which everybody gets covered off. Whatever the recommendations are, all the parties, regardless of who's in power, would sign on to those. That's what I took away from last night's debate anyway.
Yeah, I don't think, and nothing is ever guaranteed, of course, but I do think that certainly, I mean, if Bonnie Crombie were to be the next premier, I cannot imagine that there would be a lot of daylight between her and Jane Philpott, who, of course, was a federally elected Liberal. The main disagreement between the opposition parties and the government right now is not so much what policies to pursue, but how much money to spend, right? I'm sorry, spending money is, of course, a policy, but, you have the NDP, the Liberals, and the Greens all proposing billions of dollars more in spending, particularly to get people access to primary care. So I can't really see how there's any conflict between what they want to do and what the kinds of advice that Jane Philpott would be giving the government.
Having said that,
I at the risk of being churlish, we can point out factually that this government has commissioned advice from other expert groups that it sought, it received that advice, and then it did not follow that advice. One of the most recent examples was their Blue Ribbon panel on post-secondary education, which recommended, what was it, $2.5 billion in new spending to help keep the the post-secondary education system afloat. The government did not come forward with that much money. My old hobby horse, the Housing Supply Action Panel report that came out back before the 2022 election, the government commissioned this panel, asked for their advice, got the advice, has done almost nothing with that advice. So I don't expect a identical outcome with Philpott, but it is the danger of politics.
Onpolitics@tvo.org is the email to send if you want to get our attention on something, and we always love hearing from you. And that is the On Poly podcast for this February 18th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available.
Special thanks to the studio crew for making the video podcast happen, and we can give a shout out as well to David Common, who did a nice job moderating last night's leaders debate. Until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
How has Ontario's capital city been shaped by Black cultures? A new exhibit at the Museum of Toronto features an oral archive of more than 500 stories told by 100 Black Canadians. It's called Black Diasporas, Takarano, Toronto. And joining us now to discuss are Bria Dietrich, Associate Curator of Public Programs and Learning, and Davin Henson, Director of Digital Programs, both at the Museum of Toronto. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
All right, Davin, I'm going to start with you. How did this exhibit come about?
Yeah, so the exhibit came about, we were approached in late 2023 by an organization called Afro-Urban to develop an archive of stories representing the Black diaspora in the Greater Toronto Area. So we went about that, and the exhibition that we've created is comprised of over 500 stories from the Black diaspora across the GTA. And it really is curated along 5 themes and includes 12 films as well to really create this incredibly dynamic exhibition in our space.
All right, let's get an idea of what visitors will see. We have a photo. When they enter the exhibit, they'll see a map with pins on it. Tell us a little bit about this. It's a world map with red, blue, and green pins stuck to it. What's the purpose of the map? What are the pins? What do they mean?
Yeah, so we are inviting visitors to use a pin. There's 3 different colors. One color is inviting you to place a pin where you were born. The second is where you call home, and the third is where you have ties around the world.
Tell us, and I know we're looking at this map, but tell us how wide and far are we seeing some of these pins?
Yeah, so in sort of true Toronto fashion, the Caribbean is very well populated, very well populated. Yep. But then we also, we have pins in Africa, even I think Russia and Greenland. There's a couple pins.
Oh, okay.
We'd love to hear those stories. But yeah, it really spans the whole globe.
All right, you had mentioned sort of the amount of stories here.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the process of gathering the archives like?
Yeah, so the process basically started with Afro-Urban and Museum of Toronto selecting 25 interviewers who then the 25 interviewers really represented the diverse communities, Black communities across Toronto. Those 25 interviewers were then asked to bring in to nominate 2 people to interview, at which point we were really focusing on ensuring that, there was a wide representation of age, of location, occupation, and sex, so that we had a wide range of perspectives. From that point, 50 intimate interviews were conducted, 90 minutes in length, really focusing on spaces and places and meaningful moments in people's lives. From there, 8 to 10, sometimes more, stories were identified, and those really created the foundation of this archive.
Okay.
And so that was the process. From that point, we actually invited 10 filmmakers to come and engage with the archive, see which stories resonated with them. At that point, they used those stories as the foundational narrative for some short films that we had commissioned for the exhibit as well.
All right, now we do have some of those short films, but I want to take a step back and go to some of the audio sound bites, because that is, of course, a big part of this. Let's have a listen to that clip.
There's so many instances that I have where I had to convince people that I am an owner. And I think the narrative have changed also. Because I remember in 2006, even when I started the business of furnished rentals, we didn't broadcast or put a banner that we're Black owned. For many years, I was like, okay, I am the property manager. I didn't, because the perception for me too was that I would be treated differently. I would be paid less. If they thought that it was owned by somebody else, they'll treat me differently. I would be able to command more respect to, right? They okay see me in the role of property manager. And so I gave them that role.
All right, Bria, tell us a little bit. That's just one of many audio clips. Why does this exhibit focus on oral storytelling?
Yeah, so it really sort of, hearing Black voices tell their own Black stories is really important for this exhibition. I think that story in particular is in our courage section, sort of taking the leap of faith to open her own business, but also facing racial discrimination at the same time. It's 2025, and now, that would be a big selling point, a Black-owned business, but not that long ago, 20 years ago, it was something that had to be hidden, and I think it's really important to hear these stories now as we reflect back on history.
Davin, how did you make sure the final exhibit was representative of many different communities? We saw the map, we can see how wide it ranges. How do you make sure that the representation is covered?
I think it really comes back to that process that I was going through earlier about how we selected the 25 interviewers, and then also in terms of the interviewers that they were nominating, the people that they were nominating from the community. It was really important for us to just ensure that there was equal weight to factors such as age, such as location, such as occupation. So ultimately, those factors really did contribute to ensuring that we had a representation within the exhibition.
Now, Bria, obviously not all Black communities and people in general have had the same experiences. I'm curious, throughout this process, are there themes that you've found repeating themselves in some of these stories?
Mm-hmm. So within the exhibition itself, we sort of broke up the 500 stories into 5 thematic categories, being courage, faith, building, movement, and relationships, which sort of were through lines throughout. I mean, there's definitely sort of community building was a big part of a lot of stories, as particularly it relates to the Black diaspora, coming here and finding community, building that community themselves. Right. And of course, as we heard in that story, sort of racial discrimination also is like a through line that runs throughout the exhibition as well, and sort of finding your place and yourself within the city. Was
it difficult to sort of find the themes or kind of come down to the 5?
There was definitely a lot of listening to a lot of videos, a lot of oral histories. But I think ultimately it was, a lot of the stories sort of touched on those 5 thematics. And in some cases, it was difficult to decide which category each story went into, because in a lot of them, there was a lot of courage, there was a lot of faith, there was also relationships. So yeah, it definitely was a bit of a subjective approach, but also all the stories sort of, like you said, they all had a thematic through line throughout them.
You talked about tough decisions. I am curious, Davin, you mentioned those short films. Mm-hmm. There's only a handful of them, 10, correct?
There's actually 12 films.
12, okay. Yeah. You talked about it a little bit, but tell me, how did you choose which ones to kind of go through? What was that process like? And
yeah, I think so that process was very exciting, actually. So Museum of Toronto and Afro-Urban had created this archive. I think identifying which filmmakers were going to be a part of this exhibition was incredibly exciting, and it really runs the gamut of filmmakers who are seasoned, working professionals to multidisciplinary artists who maybe film isn't their main vocation, but they came in and really showed a lot of passion and generated some incredible films. Based on, we have emerging artists in there that created AI generated films. We also have films that are more traditional documentarian style, right up until animated stuff. So it was very exciting and a very rewarding process.
I think it's only fair, if we're going to talk about short films, we should see some short films.
Absolutely.
So let's have a look at one of them.
It was so amazing. The parade was incredible. I needed a week to recover. Caravana is a big thing. I think it's really a beautiful celebration. It's such an incredible thing that happens.
That's really the hot spot when everyone wants to come and visit Toronto.
It's just that vibe, it's that energy of togetherness, it's the hype, it's the pride, it's the joy, it's the freedom, it's the expression. But that, like the union and the joy and the exuberance, that's what was palpable. I don't know if I can ever, I don't think I can ever top it.
I know it's February and it's cold outside, but that gave me some good joy and some good warmth there. I am curious, Bria, what does that particular archive teach us about how Black communities have sort of shaped the city?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the stories really, they are specifically Black focused, but they're also, anybody who comes to the exhibition, it's relatable. There's a common experience in living in Toronto and being in Toronto. But there's also, there's moments that only Black people can really relate to and experience. And it was really important that we're given a voice, Black people were given a voice to talk about those personal experiences.
Davin, are these stories that most people in Toronto are familiar with? Are there stories that are that kind of surprised you when you were kind of archiving these stories?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the stories really do do run the gamut. I mean, when people come and engage with these, there will be the familiar and there'll be the unfamiliar, and they'll, ultimately we're talking about incredibly intimate conversations that people are having, and that's why we kept it first names only in terms of how we share these stories. But these are very personal stories that people are sharing that we're archiving. And I think, if there's anything that we hope that people come away with this exhibition is that, Black people have been in Toronto for generations, for hundreds of years. I think that these stories do matter, and ultimately these are Toronto stories.
All right, well, we're going to play another Toronto story. Let's have a look at another short film.
Doing archival work, you are discovering stories of our existence.
And sometimes I'll be experiencing things and then I'm like, is that my memory or is that my mom's? Why am I curious about this particular story?
My mom is a memory keeper. She cares for our family archives. And so growing up, she always instilled in me the importance of preserving our histories and remembering those who came before us.
I'm just curious, very different from the Caravana clip. I'm curious, Bria, are you taking on some weight when you're sharing these stories and hearing these stories? Is there is there responsibility as well in sort of sharing that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take very sort of seriously that, as Davin said, these are like very personal stories of people's lives and their experiences. And we want to make sure that we're doing justice to the stories that are being told and portraying them in a way that the people who are telling these stories feel good about. And that was a big part of the process as well in this archiving process, was, these interviews were taking place, 500 stories were selected, but then also we went back to the community member who told that story and to make sure that they felt comfortable with those stories being told. That was also part of the filming process, is the filmmakers took on some stories, multiple stories, it depended, but then once the film was made, they went back to the person whose stories they told to confirm that film felt representative of their stories.
All right, I want to get a little personal. I'm curious, as this exhibit came together, did you recognize yourself or your family in the stories that you heard?
Definitely. I mean, I am of mixed heritage, so Jamaican and white. And, growing up, there was not really a place to listen to just hundreds of stories of Black people's experiences in Toronto or Southern Ontario, generally speaking. And so, there's definitely stories I can relate to, and there's definitely probably stories Davin can relate to. There's definitely a little piece of, I think, any visitor who comes, they can find a bit of themselves and a bit of their history in the exhibition.
Davin, a similar question, but I am curious, did this experience change or add to your perspective of your own community and your own history?
Yeah, I mean, for me, much like Bria, I'm a multiracial background. Both my folks are from the West Indies, from Guyana, but Black, Chinese, Amerindian, European. And for me, my entry point to Blackness has always been through the West Indies. And I think that even bringing my parents to this exhibition, it's been very exciting to have West Indian folks and see multiple generations of folks come and engage with this, and also see parallels between not only their stories but more recent immigrants maybe who have come from East Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, and seeing kind of the parallels and creating those bridges between communities.
I am curious, so, as you mentioned, some of these archival stories are about the present, some are about the past. What has changed over time for the Black diaspora?
I think it's continued to get more diverse, and I think there are more stories. I think, as I was kind of mentioning earlier, the reality is this diaspora actually starts hundreds of years ago, which is when Black folks started first arriving, even before Toronto was an actual city. So I think that's a fundamental learning. And then as it's progressed, I think that there's just been, it's layers on layers of stories where there's a lot of connection across that maybe people don't see off the surface at first glance.
I'm going to ask, I'm curious, when you got headphones on, you're listening to some of these stories, is there one or two that gave you goosebumps? Or is like, this is a story that either connects with me or that you thought would resonate with others? Favorite?
I would say one of my favorites is Rosemary. It's in our movement section. A common question Black people in Toronto are asked, or people of color generally, are where are you from? Where did you come from? Where were we really born?
Right.
And her story dates back to like her parents were born here. She was born here. Her family came up as Black loyalists in the 1700s. And I just, as far as talking about the Black diaspora, I really love that story as it relates to like Black people have been here for a really long time. They've been creating community and finding themselves here. That's one of my favorite stories.
Devin?
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and say it was actually one of the films.
Okay.
I loved all of the films that were created, but one that really stands out to me is Third Class Citizen, which was done by Ayo Tsalitaba. He took an original quote, which was really talking about the challenges of engaging with our immigration system here, and he then they colored that with a set of music and pacing that really heightened that story and created a whole new experience and provided further insight into that original story. And I think that's the essence of why we did these short films. So it was incredibly captivating and engaging, I thought.
All right. In the last minute or so that we have left, I have one question. This is a massive archive. You have unearthed a number of stories, 500 stories, and I'm sure people will continue to add as they visit the museum as well. What do you hope it will be used for in the future?
You want me to answer that? So,
You both get the mic on this one, yeah.
So it exists, Black Diasporas as an exhibition exists physically in our space, but it also exists as a geolocated map on blackdiasporas.com, as well as hopefully someday museumoftoronto.com. It'll also exist there. So the archive will live on. People will be able to go onto that map and hear all of the stories and watch all of the movies, from now until hopefully forever. That's the hope that, it will continue to live on.
Yeah, I think this work that we've done with Black Diasporas really contributes to kind of Museum of Toronto's overall mission, which is to create and share digital stories about our city and be able to share those and make those accessible. So to what Bria's saying, I mean, it is something that will be documented, will be archived on our website, and will remain there for people in the city to be able to engage with long after this exhibition is closed.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there. Davin, Bria, thank you so much. Should mention again, Black Diasporas Takarano Toronto is on at the Museum of Toronto until March 1st, and you can go through the map of the oral archives at blackdiasporas.com.
Yes.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that is the agenda for Tuesday, February 18th, 2025. Wednesday on the program is hallway medicine, an election issue. We'll discuss that tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.